Ron Paul, chairman and founder of the Ron Paul Institute, very kindly joins me on the line. Good to speak to you, Ron. Donald Trump, he's not a man who does things that he doesn't want to do. And he did indeed call this bill significantly flawed. And despite all of that, he's gone ahead and signed it. What is his motivation to do so?
Well, I think he feels the pressure. The deep state, the neocons, and the media are very, very powerful. And they can put a lot of pressure on a president. So they've ganged up on him. And I thought he had sort of a mediocre position on this. I was strongly opposed to it, and I volunteered my advice, which was totally ignored. But he went ahead and signed it. I think it was more like a political thing. But I don't think on the long run this benefits him. I don't think it benefits America. It certainly doesn't benefit, peace in the world between Europe and Russia. So I think it's a terrible thing to have happen. But there are some, those who qualify to be participants in the deep state, they are determined, almost obsessed with making sure that there is no friendship between the United States and Russia, between Putin and Trump. I think that is tragic. Even when Russia and the Soviet Union existed, we actually were quite willing, when necessary, to talk and work out some problems. But now we're moving in the other directions. They're literally anxious to see this because they think the interests of the various countries that are involved, whether it's Syria, whether it's Iran, and these various areas, that if they if they allow us to be friendly with Russia, that it will undermine their goals in the Middle East.
So this puts Donald Trump in a difficult situation. One thing he said during his election campaign was that he would be the man calling each and every shot from the White House. Another thing he said was he wanted closer, more friendly relations with Russia. So both of those are being thwarted. Just how frustrated will he be?
Well, he's going to be very frustrated, but it also goes to show that, the intellectual community, the people who design policy are actually outside of Washington. So if you have people preaching socialism or people preaching interventionism or people who desire to have an American empire, they really are in charge. So he is going to be frustrated and will be, but they are merely reflecting the amount of control that the individuals have in our media and in the political sphere. And unfortunately, they're doing quite well, even overcoming the little bit of effort that Trump has exerted, because his campaign rhetoric and positions were much better, but they weren't based on firm convictions, and that's why I think he can go back and forth, thinking maybe that conceding a little bit here, the deep state will ease off on the pressure, but I don't think that's the case. If you give in, they just add on to the pressure, and I think it's much better to have a precise philosophy and a policy, and of course, our institute is dedicated to peace and prosperity and getting along with people and trading with people, which is exactly opposite of looking for enemies and looking for sanctions and putting on pressure and have this militarism going on. So I think this means that our institute think that our foreign policy is moving in the wrong direction.
Is this just one particular issue where Congress and Trump disagree and they're completely at opposite ends of the spectrum, or is this a sign of how it's going to be throughout his term in office, with Congress opposing him?
Well, I think what's going on is this is the big issue, but they don't mind using, say, the medical issue as a lever and say, well, look, if you go along with us, and maybe we'll help you in these other areas. But they don't want Trump to have the credibility where he would be allowed to be more independent on foreign policy, so they had to do their best to have an embarrassment over Obamacare. But that is another standing issue, so I think it will affect other issues. The one thing the Republican administration is hoping for, that they can overcome these obstacles, is getting enough Republicans together to actually try to stimulate our economy with some tax reform and tax reductions. So it remains to be seen, but if there's this determination that the deep state wants the chaos and the conflict with Russia. They might even work very, very hard, one way or another, to even stop, some things that would be very beneficial, like changing our tax code and reducing taxes, even if it meant reduce taxes for the entire middle class. They would fight this if they think there's any sign that they're losing the fight in promoting this antagonism with Russia.
In terms of the sanctions, who do you think they hurt the most? Is it Russia? Is it Iran? China? Or is it Donald Trump?
Well, on the long run, I think it's the American people, because we give up, this move toward conflict rather than peace and prosperity. So if it's a hot war or a cold war, it usually affects our civil liberties here at home. And when you think of the needless wars that we have been fighting for 15 years in the Middle East, we've also suffered tremendously from loss of civil liberties here in this country. But, in the short run, Trump's going to be set back. I think those individuals who coalesce around, a mentality of conflict with Russia, they seem to be winning. But I think they're getting more desperate, because in many ways, our whole goal, our government's goal, was to get rid of Assad. Assad has to go, and that was the previous administration. So this attitude is bipartisan, and that has been going on. But I don't think anybody believes Assad's going to disappear. So I think there's been a bit of a victory for Russia and the Syrians, which makes people who want to be, patriotic. Everybody wants, strong patriotism and strength and victories. So the neocons will play on this and say, hey, no, they're getting pushed around. We're getting kicked out of Syria. Well, I'd like to have never gone into Syria, to tell you the truth. That would have been a pro-American foreign policy. But I think all this stuff that's going on, ultimately, it hurts the American people. It hurts us because we lose our civil liberties. It hurts us because we send our military around the world and they suffer consequences. And we suffer the consequences of wasting a lot of money, and a financial condition. Our dollar right now is down 10% in this year. So there's some ramifications from this, and the dollar being down there's a lot of reasons for that, but it might be a reflection of what's going on in foreign policy. At least that could add fuel to the fire.
Ron, Donald Trump speaks in very tough terms about North Korea. It seems like he's readying for conflict. Is he doing this, though, just to appease Congress, to get them on side?
I think he's grandstanding. I think he likes to intimidate. He hopes that his type of rhetoric will be good, work out as good diplomacy. But he keeps saying all options are on the table. But quite frankly, he hasn't ever considered, nor have we as a government considered the option we should have considered. A few years back in the 70s, we had to leave Vietnam after a tragic loss of 60,000 Americans. And Vietnam has survived and have done well, and we're friends with them and we trade with them. But when we went into Korea, and I consider it illegally because it wasn't a declared war, we killed a lot of people, killed Koreans, killed a lot of Americans got killed. But we stayed there. So the option that we ought to put on the table is, why don't we just get out of there? Let the Koreans deal with it. And quite frankly, with our intimidation, we create UN. I think UN actually is acting and responding in a realistic manner, because if he looks at what we have done, we got Gaddafi to get rid of his nukes, we got Saddam Hussein to get rid of his nukes, and then we destroyed them. They had nothing to defend themselves with. And also, we had the Iranians. We have this treaty where they're basically agreeing not to make a nuke, and they can verify this. But our government now is still yelling and screaming that that we have to deal with the danger of Iran. So I would think the options on the table is just threat and intimidation. I think, and the South Koreans, their new president has expressed an interest in maybe we ought to at least talk a little bit. with North Korea. Their families would like to get together again. It's really their business, because they are vulnerable. If we go around and mess around, that's why it's hard for me to believe that they would be that stupid as to start bombing North Korea without North Korean committing an act of aggression. And they may concoct some artificial act of aggression so that they can go in and bomb. But can you imagine what Seoul, Korea is going to look like? I mean, it is a disaster. I think Lindsey Graham is one of the most provocative persons who wants this. He speaks for the neoconservatives and the deep state. He wants this. This is their whole goal, because this is the only way they can cancel out the losses of our foreign policy strategy in the Middle East. So unfortunately, Graham, although I think would be very unpopular, he ran for president, didn't get any votes, he's very unpopular, except for our media. He gets on all the major networks, and he gets to talk tough talk why we have to go after this guy that has a bomb. I don't believe he actually has a bomb. He'd like to get one, and he can hold the United States in check a little bit if he has that option. And he's just not likely. He's not able to do it. Those missiles have not been proven that they can reach this, so it's all hype. It's not a whole lot different than when I was in Congress and worked real hard to try to prevent our invasion of Iraq. All the lies that were told and our invasion was based on that. We're hearing the same type of war propaganda, and that feeds into the people who make a lot of money off of war. Not only the people who sell weapons, but also the people who gather up the oil and the natural resources. So it's a bad struggle. It's very dangerous, but I think we could have a foreign policy, if it were designed more for non-intervention, that we could contribute to a more peaceful world.
It's fascinating just listening to everything you just said there, Ron, and you've kind of set it up in the sense that you said that you don't think that the people in charge are that stupid to do this again. And then you explained how they've done it in the past, and all the situation, it's really kind of history repeating itself, in that there's a threat that isn't a threat, and you've got very aggressive politicians and the military-industrial complex baying for an opportunity. What are the chances that we're going to see conflict with North Korea? Can you put a percentage on this?
I would hope it's less than 25%, but that still is a disaster, just out of practicality, because maybe they'll wake up and realize how dangerous it is. What I worry about, is a false flag, that we have our ships over there and we have these military exercises, and all they have to do is have one American ship shot at and sunk or something, and then it would be all out war. No, and never ask questions who did what. But there are some people who would, literally do that in order to provoke this type of activity. So I just don't want to believe that. And I have a personal relationship to what was going on. I've been in Korea when I was in the Air Force at different times, but I had a teacher that was drafted for the Korean War, back in the 50s, and was killed over there. And I don't see any sense to it. Matter of fact, I don't see much sense to any of these wars, and I don't think there's many countries that are totally guilt-free from this, because there's always seems to be pressure in the country for a strong patriotism and being tough, and most of the time it's talk and bombast, but then it gets out of hand, and they anticipate, oh yeah, he wouldn't be dumb enough to do this, we'll do this and that, and then finally there's an accident or somebody lets loose, or somebody listens to Graham and thinks, oh my God, Graham is ready to go. I guess we better go. If he says that they're about to destroy the world, we better destroy them first. And that's part of the Bush doctrine, is you go there before they start, or before they come, and before they aggress, which is a policy that I find rather detestable.
Ron, great as always to speak to you. Some really forthright views. Really appreciate your time. Former US Congressman, founder of the Ron Paul Institute. Ron Paul is my guest.